Hello. Before we start with the new moon reading this month, I just wanted to draw your attention to two products that I've released on Patreon. One of 3 of 78 and Reading Q&A are two products for you if you are interested in learning tarot or improving your technique or rounding out your already established tarot practice. I won't go into too much detail here, but I just wanted to signpost the way to them in case you hadn't heard about them. And if you want more information, then you can head over to my website, integratedtarot.com, or you can do a search for me on Patreon. Integrated Tarot should bring up the page straight away. Otherwise, without further ado, we'll get straight on to the new moon reading. Hello and welcome to the New Moon Tarot reading for the new moon that fell on Saturday, the 10th of July. I apologise for this being a couple of days late, but you would not have wanted to hear my voice if I'd recorded it then. I had a bit of a new moon cold, and so I just gave myself a couple of days to recover. And while my voice isn't exactly back to normal, it is back to some kind of semblance of human and not robot. So that's as good as it gets for now. To all of those of you who are new to the reading, welcome. And welcome back to those of you who have listened to one or more readings before. Apologies to those of you who know what I'm going to say now, but I do need to just go through a couple of the details of the way that I read and to explain the card positions. And I will mark in the track description, if that's available where you're listening, where you can begin with the reading itself. So if you want to skip ahead to that, then please do. But for those of you who are continuing to listen, I do a 3-card reading. Very rarely I will draw a 4th card, rarer still a 5th. This feels like a 3-card reading to me, but who knows what will happen when I've drawn the cards or turned them over and read them. I read alongside you in as much as I do not look at the cards in advance. I am recording and I record as I'm turning the cards over, and I turn them over sequentially. In other words, not all at once. I will read one card, then the next, and then all 3 of them together in terms of the whole story that they make. And the 3 positions remain the same for every reading I do. The first card is the foundation card, and it's worth bearing in mind really one thing when it comes to this, and that is that it has already happened. So whatever it is that the card is, it explains something that has happened or is in the process of happening. It's the card that is the most out of our control because obviously cannot go back and change what has happened or change what is in the process of happening. But what it is it forms the sort of critical basis for what then goes on with the second card. So it's a foundation for the second card, which is the current weather. The current weather is the prevailing sort of theme that is going to be playing out in the next 4 weeks and beyond. Obviously, there will be other themes playing out, but this one will be significant in one way or another. That's not to say, when I say prevailing, that it is going to be the most obvious theme, though for many of us it will be the most obvious theme. But it will be one that is significant in as much as it will have some kind of profound impact on the way that life unfolds and is unfolding. So it may be something that you see immediately or something that you only look back on and then notice in hindsight. So I would say that if you don't notice immediately what's going on, then I would be curious about when it might happen or to look for signs of the card. And in some way, then that will signpost something to you that is saying, this is worth noticing, it's worth bearing in mind. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad thing. I don't like the terms good and bad. I just think that sometimes we're really swift to judgment, and that really it's something that we often have to go back and then revise, because some things that seem good on the surface aren't necessarily what they say they are, and some things that seem bad on the surface then actually have inside them a gift of one kind or another. But it will be significant for you in one way or another. It will have some tangible impact on your life, or on who it is that you are and who it is that you're becoming. And then the final card is the one card where some control is handed back to you, and that is the tool card, or the agency card. So this is the way that you can act upon your environment. So whereas the foundation card is pretty much out of your control, the tool card is where you can engage with the theme in a way that is personally meaningful for you. It may not be meaningful for anyone else, and that doesn't matter in the slightest. It may be something really big that you can do. It may be something that could feel so small that it feels worthless, and I would question any kind of judgment that you have over this tool card, because again, like going back to the theme of good and bad, the impact that you think that you're having may feel either really large or really small, and it may turn out to be the opposite. It may turn out to be the same, or it may be that what you are impacting is not really what you thought you were impacting when you were acting upon something. So it really is about adopting a beginner's mind to the cards, but also then to the way that the cards, or what it is that the cards are describing. And in that way, there is a sense of mystery that we can engage with, rather than necessarily trying to engage with the card meanings themselves. That's quite a, let me see if I can phrase it a different way. So in other words, if you can take a step back with the cards, and instead of trying to shoehorn the meanings into your life, or your life around the meanings, is rather to take a more hands-off, as I said, beginner's mind approach to things, that to assume that you don't know the whole story, and that to assume that sometimes less is more when it comes to what it is that you do with the card meanings in front of you. And really, this is something that is learnt and is assumed the more that we not only work with tarot, but the more that we work with our lives and with ourselves. That maybe I can only speak for myself here, so I'll speak for myself. That the older I get, the more I can control less, or rather, the more I understand that I can control things less in an active way. But the more that I understand that there is a wisdom behind the scenes that is connected to me, and whereas I can't always feel the connection, I don't always understand it or appreciate it, that really is guiding and directing life. And my job is not to guide and direct my life as much as to listen to that wisdom as much as possible, and to act from that. I am now going to go into the first card, the foundation card. So as I said, this has already happened, or is in the process of happening, but is in some way forming it underpins the theme. The theme builds on this. And that is the 9 of Wands, which is strength. Now, last month we got the 9 of Cups in the center card. We have another 9 here. And 9s are really about a culminating kind of energy. I did an article on the 9s about culminating. So it is the point where things start to come together and form some kind of whole, or some kind of pattern that is more cohesive. It focuses energy in order to switch into the 10s, which then spells some kind of change. So 10s are the end of the line, something needs to change. Things are constantly changing, but with the 9, it's something finally coming together. Now, this is the foundation. So we are sort of moving out of 9 territory, I guess, because this is foundational. The 9 is already happening, or has already happened. And the 9 in this card is about some kind of breakthrough. Now, I'm going to go back to the Waite-Smith version of this card because I think that sometimes it's good to go back to, I kind of think of the Waite-Smith in a way as the sort of the theory. So if you're learning music, it's about going back and doing your scales and arpeggios and learning all of the different notes and what they entail. And the Waite-Smith for me is that kind of underpinning of a certain kind of framework on which the tarot then is built or in some way informs it. And the Nine of Wands is the figure that is standing there in the foreground on a stage, and there are 8 wands behind him, and he is holding or leaning on the 9th wand and is looking pretty much battle weary and is looking at the wands behind him sort of with a raised eyebrow in a way, like saying, oh my goodness, are you going to do the same thing that you did to me last time, which is, kick my ass, basically. And there is something here about learning or integrating rather, because we may think that we're consciously learning, but it's the unconscious part of us that really is doing the learning and the integrating if we let it. But learning a lesson of the past and in some way, instead of adopting an offensive maneuver, which is assuming that these wands are there to do harm, is rather to align with the energy, and then something happens. There is a shift. And this is the same in the Nine of Wands in the Röhrig deck, which is what I'm reading with. And I'm going to see if there are any English words on this that, apart from strength, energy, completion. So there you go. It's right there. The idea of completion. So something is where everything is energetically lined up and is able to break some kind of very rigid pattern. In this card, you can see this stone block, which is also the stone block that is in the 5 of Cups, as far as I can remember in this deck. It's a similar one, sort of floating above the ground, and there's also a stone block actually in the 10 of Wands, which is interesting. So it's floating above the ground, but it has been blasted open. These very, very thick walls have been shattered and blasted open by this massive pulse of light. And so that is the release of energy. It's the release of something that has been, prior to this, used elsewhere. Now, you know me, I take a very psychological approach to things, so I'm going to explain this in a psychological way. You may be able to relate to this, you may not. It may not be relevant to you, but because this is my approach to tarot, then hopefully this will strike a chord for at least some of you. Or if it doesn't strike a chord for you in this particular metaphor, you may be able to, or you may use it to adapt it to the way that you have experienced the Nine of Wands in your own life. So Wands energy, energy is what drives the psyche. And in the 7 of Wands in the Waite-Smith deck, there is this figure that is on top of a cliff, and he is battling these wands. With his one wand, he's battling these wands that are coming up from the bottom of the picture. Now, that to me has always been the idea of a defense mechanism. This using the energy to push something down that is rising up into consciousness. And sometimes our defense mechanisms are there and they work very well for us. There is a reason why they're there. But other times, long after perhaps the initial trauma has happened or the initial thing that we are defending against has happened, we still continue to have these defense mechanisms, whether that is, suppression, repression, projection, all of these ones that and depression, which is another form of energy being pushed down. So energy is then devoted to focusing on this thing that a part of us believes needs to stay out of our awareness, because it feels that we will be safer if we are not aware of it. And when this is allowed, this thing that is out of our awareness is allowed in some way, and I would say preferably allowed in a very safe and contained way, to be brought into consciousness, to be looked at, to be studied, to be experienced, because sometimes it's not an intellectual insight as much as it is an emotional insight. It can be a very physical, bodily experience. When it is allowed to do that, then energy that has been used to keep that at bay is then released and is available to be used elsewhere in life. So depression is the loss of energy because a lot of energy, psychic energy, is being devoted to keeping something down and hidden. When that is addressed through therapy, for example, then those energy reserves are freed up. And very often when somebody emerges from a depression, there is a renewed sense of vigor, there is a renewed sense of libidinal life. And this strength card, the Nine of Wands, is describing that experience of that. It's not just a sort of metaphorical breakthrough, but it's also the breaking down of walls of separation of you from yourself, of you from the vitality that resides within. It's as if that light source has come from inside that block and is now released. And I would say that this is a controlled explosion. This feels very much, it's a sort of tight circle of blocks and a sort of tight sort of ball of light. It is as controlled as it can be. It is a contained explosion in the same way that if you are, a demolition team, it looks, when a building's being demolished, it looks chaotic, but actually there is a very controlled way of doing that so that the building stays within the footprint. It doesn't damage anything else around it. And this is what this strength card seems to be to me. So foundational to your experience right now is the releasing of some energy. That may come with an insight. It may come with an aha moment. It may not come with an aha moment. That is not indicative of whether that has been a successful venture or not. These insights are useful up to a point, but what is more, for me, indicative of that kind of release is the availability of energy. So there is a renewed sense of energy. There may be a renewed physical feeling of energy, but there is also a renewed interest in life. And that is incredibly important. And I'm going to assume that it is also important, this renewed interest in life, this new availability to be interested in life with what is emerging over the next 4 weeks and beyond, which is the current weather or the theme, which is card number 2, which I am going to turn over now. And it is another 9. We now have the 9 of Pentacles, or the 9 of Discs in this deck. And it's beautiful how the card mirrors the 9 of Wands, and you'll be able to see this in the images accompanying the reading. I love the fact that there is a poetry to the 2 9s. And in fact, having the 9 of Cups last month and also the Hermit, was that last month? I'm not sure. It was the month before, which is a 9. So the 9 of Discs is called Gain in this deck. And the writing, I'm just going to see if, the more I give, the more I get. Association of love, wisdom, and creativity. And in the card itself, the block has been replaced by a kind of nautilus, a sort of a spiral, or a snail shell, which is very much the sort of concrete version of that vortex that appears in the 9 of Cups. So you have that. The light of the explosion in the 9 of Wands is now this sort of shadow of light, this corona of light around the 3 figures. And the exploding blocks, the little bits that have been thrown off and the big bits that have been thrown off, almost take the form then of the discs themselves as they create this circle around these figures. And then that circle is kind of completed by the shell underneath, and then the rock on which the shell is based. So there is a very solid grounding to this experience. The rock of this floating rock, this thing that isn't grounded in the 9 of Wands, has given way to something that is grounded, that is more real, that feels authentic. Defense mechanisms are not authentic complexes, which sort of tied with defense mechanisms. And if you're not familiar with that idea, then if you can look up the idea of complexes as described by Jung, Complexes are not authentic. In fact, they are roles or acts unconsciously, these masks, a false self that we play as defenses, defending against something, whether that's vulnerability or fear or grief or rage. There are many different complexes that are there, and they feel like that rock that's floating above the surface. But whereas in the Nine of Discs, this rock is part of the world. You are grounded. There is a groundedness being reached. What these three figures are resting on is a sort of combination of groundedness, but also the sense of possibility of this spiral. And I go back to Jung's teachings about the idea of spirals, about the fact that we are forever walking round and round and round, but the more we walk round, the closer we get to the center of all things, which is the center of you, which is the self with a capital S. Everything that we do is part of that circumambulatory experience of drawing closer to a core sense of oneself, a core sense of who it is that we really are, not what we would like to be or what other people think that we should be, or what we don't want to be. Sometimes we resist who we are, either because we don't really relish the idea of embracing those aspects of ourselves because they seem negative, or we resist because they seem too good. Either way, again, going back to the idea of positive and negative, I adopt a wait and see attitude whenever my brain decides to make a particular judgment about whether something is supposedly good or bad. But in here, there is that sense of spiraling, that sense of concreteness, discs are the pentacles, they are the most solid part of the suit. So in some way, there is going to be a physical manifestation of an inner experience in your life this month. It may come in with bells and whistles. It may be a big change. It may be a very, very subtle change, but it will be one that filters into your everyday life. It is not just simply something you are going to be feeling inside as a possibility, but rather it is going to root itself as an experience, as a lived experience, a felt sense, but one that then is acted out in some way in your life, whether through you or whether it comes to you or whether it's both. But there is this idea of association of love, wisdom, and creativity. So this is collaborative. This is collaborative in some way, and that may be concretely or literally collaborative in an external sense, in as much as it will be a group of people. Here it's three. It looks like two men and a woman, and that may play out very, very literally in several of your lives. This idea of two men and one woman and some kind of collaborative partnership. However, I think that there's also something here about the inner collaboration as well. So for those of you where it doesn't seem to make sense that it is in a sort of physical partnership with others, it could also be a physical partnership in terms of the business that you run, your resources, organization. I wouldn't treat these human figures literally as people all the time, but aspects of things that you encounter in your everyday outer life, or, as I was driving to just now, aspects of yourself, a greater sense of integration. I'm curious about the fact that it's two male figures and one female figure, and then I'm drawn to the difference in the way that the two male figures are dressed. So one of them is very much a sort of silhouetted figure, and the other one is wearing this multicolored jacket. And I wonder if here is a richness of something coming through that was otherwise quite one-dimensional. And because it's the male figure, then I wonder if it is a sort of multicolored experience of being out in the world and being active and being driven and being focused and in some way quite assertive in questing and getting something done. And then the female is linking arms. And again, I'll go back just a step before I talk about this. It's not about sex or gender roles as much as it is about aspects of our personality. So there is the yin at the center, and then there's these two yang figures on the outside. And the yin is almost the glue that holds them together. So the yin is this receptive, aware, diffuse idea of being open to something, being inclusive of things, I'm trying to think of another way of working, of explaining it. Whereas the yang is out and singularly focused, the yin is there as that glue between the spaces. So in other words, the yin is web thinking. It's being able to make connections between certain things. She is able to make the connection between these two separate figures, one in the darkness and one sort of multicolored. There is the marrying of these two aspects of oneself, the active self. So there is something about you being active in the world in perhaps a way that is more in line with who you really are, rather than being active and not showing up fully as yourself. Going out there and going through the motions, or at least going out there and only going partway through the motions, or going out there and only showing one certain aspect because, well, for whatever reason, either because you weren't aware of the other aspects of yourself, or you somehow think that they are, they're not going to be received well, or that you didn't think that you had a right to own them. But there is now the bringing through of something that really is very active, that is more in tune with who you are, whatever that is. So this is about showing up in sort of full glory of this spectrum of colours, no matter what other people think of you. There is the vantage point here of the three figures sort of standing above the ground in this field of what looks like flowers, which is beautiful, of being able to rise above what it is that other people may or may not say. Because what they may or may not say, and it works both ways, what they're not saying as well as what they might be saying, or whether they're saying something positive or negative, they're kind of secondary. Well, not kind of secondary, they are secondary to the most important thing, which is the importance of one's own self-realization, of one's becoming. You are able to become something more now because in some way a defense mechanism has been removed or more energy has been released, and that is going to come through in a way that allows the expression of more of you. And it's going to be in a very material way. That could be through your work, it could be through your relationships, it could simply be through what you wear or who you are. But it's not simply going to be, as I said earlier, in your mind. It's not going to be a fantasy. It's going to be something that really is very real. And I think that one of the things that's really important here is not to attach judgments to that. It's the judgments attached that stop the thing from coming up in the first place. And a lot of these judgments are going to have been unconscious ones, and they are going to have been internalized judgments from others, particularly people that you grew up with, family members, parents, primary carers, authority figures. Some way you felt, whether you knew it or not, and you probably didn't even articulate it to yourself, that there was an aspect or aspects of yourself that it would be better that you didn't show, whether that was anger or whether it was some kind of extroversion or whatever it was, whatever color there is it's whatever permutation it was that is uniquely part of you. But you learnt that there was a part or parts of you that you shouldn't show. And you learnt it so well that you then forgot that you learnt it, and you forgot those parts of you. And then there came a point where they never existed, and it didn't even come into your mind that they existed. So it fell out of thought, it fell out of any kind of memory, it fell out of conscious awareness. And the prodigal son or daughter is coming home. There is are coming back into awareness. There is this small figure walking down the road that is an aspect of you that is coming back. And it may feel like a complete stranger. And that doesn't matter. It is the fact that it is coming back. And then the 9 of discs is possibly about extending a hand and inviting it up to stand, as one of these 3 figures on this shell. And then therefore something is fulfilled, something falls into place. These 9 discs fall into place. There is a sense of harmony. There may be a sense of it being unfamiliar. It may take some time to get to know that aspect, but it's not that aspect doesn't belong. It may feel like a pair of new shoes. They're shoes that are just your size and they fit, but they just might take some getting used to. So that is the theme of some kind of gain. And I would say, it could be, as I said, gain outside in the world. It could be something where you have gained some kind of compound interest. It could actually be compound interest, or it could be a new venture, a new alliance. But it could also be gain of oneself, a reuniting of a part of you. And then the tool card, so something that you can use while you are going through this, the 2 9s, is the 4 of Swords. Now, the 4 of Swords came up 2 months ago as the central card, as far as I can remember. And this is now being used as the tool card. And what's interesting is that I was going to remark that snail-like figure, the snail-like rock under the shell in the 9 of discs reminded me of the rock in the 4 of Swords. And well, here it is, and they're side by side, and I can see why. There is that similar shape. There's the striations, even though they're slightly different. And the rock in the 4 of Swords has this radiating glacial feel as opposed to this rounded spiral-like feel of the shell in the 9 of discs. And what I would say is this, and it's a very short tool card this month, because it really is simply about not acting straight away on anything. So not making decisions, it's about taking time out to rest. This process of integration, the explosion in the 9 of Wands that's already happened, and then the 9 of discs coming into fruition is a lot. It's a lot, and even if it doesn't feel like a lot, I think it behooves you to just take it easy, and for a lot of us, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, we're sort of going into holidays, long school holidays. This is the time in the UK, at least, when people have got their eyes on going away, taking some time off, kicking back, putting feet up, doing something else. And the 4 of Swords is just about that. It is that. It is. You don't need to go out and fight any more battles yet. You do not need to do that. In fact, just give yourself a mental rest, because this is Swords. So we've got 3 different suits here. We've got Wands, we've got discs, we've got Swords. And the truce part is just to give your mind a break. Give yourself some headspace. Put things on ice. This may well be, quite literally, as I said, a physical break. It is about being able to just take that time off. But even if you're not able to do that, or you can't afford to do that, there is something here then about not making a decision just yet on anything. There is this new aspect coming along. It is for you. It is walking down the road to you. It isn't for anyone else, because it not only is for you, but it is linked into you. It is a part of you as well, even if it manifests outside in a concrete way. So what's for you won't go past you. My mother always used to say that to me, and I really do believe it. What's for you won't go past you. So just take your foot off the gas a little bit, and just allow things to just ease in a much more considered way. You don't need to rush ahead. You know, the fire of the wands, it has passed or is passing. This is now the sort of the cool as a cucumber moment of the Four of Swords, where it's just like, okay, I'm not going to be making any decisions right now. I'm just going to take a little bit of time and space, and, you know, just to allow things to line up in a way that isn't heated and in the rush, because you could be feeling incredibly enthusiastic about what's going on. Or you could be feeling in a panic about what's going on. You know, either way, no judgment. But either way, just bear in mind the Four of Swords. This stuff will wait. The swords will be able to move into action. The mind will move into action in a little while. Maybe Four of Swords, 4 weeks, maybe 4 months. Not 4 days, but more like weeks. And then you will know what to do, because the mind will have rested. You will have rested. There will have been this allowing of something else and the wisdom of something else to move towards you and to integrate in spite of you, and in spite of your conscious attempts to control it, or your belief that you can control it. This is all coming into place, and it will in its own time. So you can just take some time out. And I'll leave it at that for this month. And I wanted to give you a note, because talking about the Four of Swords, I am going to be taking some time out in August. So there won't be a new moon reading until September. But I would suggest that there is more than enough to be going on with for the next, over the summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, the winter in the Southern Hemisphere. And I hope that you have some time to yourself, some time to recuperate. You don't need to worry too much about the details of that or anything that you need to do or need not do. It is just the intention to take some time out. And I will speak to you again in September. Until then, take very good care. Goodbye.